Harebrained Schemes is an American video game studio based in Seattle, Washington. It was co-founded in 2011 by Jordan Weisman and Mitch Gitelman. Prior to founding Harebrained Schemes, Weisman and Gitelman worked together on the Mech Commander and Crimson Skies franchises at FASA, another company founded by Weisman. As of mid-2015, the studio had just under 60 employees. History. In 2011, Weisman and Gitelman reunited to work on the mobile game Crimson Steam Pirates, which became Harebrained Schemes' first game. The following year, the studio released a second mobile game, Strike Fleet Omega. Both games were well received, with Crimson Steam Pirates making Metacritic's Best iPhone Games of 2011 list and Strike Fleet Omega making the Google Play Store's Best Games of 2012 list. Harebrained then went on to develop several games in the Shadowrun franchise. In 2012, the studio raised $1.8 million through Kickstarter to fund the development of Shadowrun Returns, becoming only the third studio to raise $1 million on Kickstarter. The studio had been considering using Kickstarter as a funding source since 2011, but it was not until the Kickstarter for Broken Age raised over $3 million that Harebrained Schemes felt that the crowd-raising platform could be a viable funding option. The game was released in mid-2013. One of the campaign's stretch goals was a second city, which became the expansion campaign Shadowrun. Dragonfall. Dragonfall was released free to backers of Shadowrun Returns, and in September 2014 was re-released as a standalone game of Shadowrun. Dragonfall, Director's Cut. The studio returned to Kickstarter to fund Shadowrun Hong Kong in early 2015. Work on Shadowrun Hong Kong had already begun using the studio's own funds by the time that the Kickstarter campaign was launched. The money raised through Kickstarter instead went towards expanding the amount of content that they would be able to put into the game. The studio set a funding goal of $100,000, which it reached in 2 hours. The campaign would go on to raise $1.2 million. The series has been well reviewed by critics. Shadowrun Returns received an aggregate rating of 76/100 on Metacritic. As an expansion, Shadowrun Dragonfall received a score of 81/100, while the standalone re-release received a score of 87/100. Shadowrun Hong Kong received a score of 81/100. In addition to its Shadowrun titles, Harebrained Schemes also funded the development of the board game Golem Arcana through Kickstarter. Released in August 2014, Golem Arcana uses a physical game board and miniatures, supported by a mobile app that manages Fog of War, the game's rules, and gameplay events. The board and app communicate using a Bluetooth stylus. The Kickstarter for Golem Arcana raised just over $500,000. In 2014, the studio also announced that they were developing Necropolis, an action roguelike set for release in 2016. A pre-alpha version of the game was featured at the 2015 PAX East conference. In mid-2015, the studio announced that they were preparing to hold a fourth Kickstarter to fund a new game in the BattleTech franchise, set to be titled BattleTech. There had been speculation that the studio would create a game in either the BattleTech or Crimson Skies franchise, owing to Weisman's role in the creation of those franchises. The Kickstarter campaign for BattleTech was launched on September 29, 2015. Like Shadowrun Hong Kong, Harebrained Schemes already allocated funding for BattleTech, and the intention of the Kickstarter was to raise funds for additional features. The major goals for the Kickstarter were a single-player campaign if $1 million was raised, an expanded campaign if $1.85 million was raised, and multiplayer if $2.5 million was raised. The Kickstarter's initial goal was $250,000, which it reached in under an hour. Titles: Crimson Steam Pirates, Strike Fleet Omega, Shadowrun Returns, Shadowrun, Dragonfall, Golem Arcana, Shadowrun, Hong Kong, Necropolis, Battletech,